Who is the stranger that you have only seen / meet once in your life that you still think about time to time? When I was fresh out of college, I drove over 2 hours away for a job interview and got into a car accident like a block away from the building. My car was completely totaled. A woman who was stopped at the stop sign near my accident pulled over and got out to make sure I was okay. I was completely fine physically, but have very bad anxiety and immediately had a panic attack. I was sobbing and couldn't catch my breath, and this complete stranger sat with me the entire time telling me to breathe and just being so caring and supportive. She waited with me for the police to come. She helped me talk them through what happened. She called my mom for me. She even called the office I was on my way to so she could let them know about the accident and that I would call them to reschedule my interview. As if that wasn't enough, once she found out that I was that far away from home and it was going to take my mom 2 hours to get to me, she cancelled her meeting that she was already late to so she could drive me halfway. She did not think it was a big deal whatsoever. She just stepped up to the plate to help without question. I would have been completely alone and lost without her that day. She was an angel, honestly. I lost her business card between all the paperwork from the accident, and I've been kicking myself over it for the last 5 years. All I want is to call her and tell her how thankful I am and that I've kept her in my thoughts ever since. Roxanne, if you're out there, thank you so much. And please, for the love of God, send me your last name so I can send you some flowers. Honor her by paying it forward. At some point in your life you're going to see a person in need. In that moment, you have the power to be their Roxanne. Today you, tomorrow me. When I was a kid, I flew by myself for the first time. At the airport, when I was about to check in, I spotted an elderly lady looking at me deeply. At first I thought I accidentally hit her or something, so I asked if she needed anything. She nodded. Didn't give it much importance, so I just checked in and headed to my plane. Later, already on the plane, I see the very same lady looking for her seat. Of course I helped her and asked her what number her seat was. She handed me her ticket, B37. I'll never forget it because I was the C37. She sat right next to me. I was scared. I was a kid and I wasn't used to coincidences. Anyway, long flight. When we arrived and were waiting for the plane to land for us to head out, she finally says, "You know, you really look like my daughter. I even thought you were her. But she passed away 5 years ago. Silly me. Here, this is her with my grandkids." She handed me her phone with a zoomed in picture. I was paralyzed when I saw her. She looked exactly like me, but she was 28 and I was 10. I couldn't even talk. Now that I'm older, every time I look in the mirror for my birthday, I remember that lady in the picture. I'm a living photo of her daughter. Every year that goes by is a year that I look more like that woman in the picture. When I turn 28, I hope this memory will finally scare me less. I worked with a guy who met a lady at a garage sale who showed him a picture of her son who had passed, and they were almost identical. In fact, they were so identical that to this day, almost 10 years since the introduction, my friend is still real good friends with her and her family and regularly attends family/holiday functions. He showed me the pictures, and even after working side by side with this dude for 5 years, I couldn't tell who was who in the photos. I was at a garage sale once and this little 2-year-old girl comes running up to me and jumps in my arms. She had mistaken me for her mother and no one was going to convince her otherwise. She was crying when her grandmother pulled her back. I met my husband's doppelganger once. The man looked exactly like my husband. I was with someone at the hospital waiting for their medical transport to pick us up, and I saw who I thought was my husband across the street. My husband was supposed to be at work, so I was confused. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. My patient and I walked over to him, but I stopped short a few feet away because I started to realize maybe it wasn't actually him. His clothes were different and this man was assisting someone in carriage driving type role. My husband absolutely would not do that. The guy noticed me staring at him, and so I explained why and even showed him a picture of my husband. He swore that was a picture of him and this was all some practical joke. I had to show him pictures of my husband and I together for him to realize the pictures were not of him. This man could have been his identical twin. I often think of that encounter and how insane it was. I also think of the astronomical chances that not only did my husband have a doppelganger, but that we lived in the same city for a while and I happened to cross paths with him. I was once approached by a woman in a supermarket who told me, "Oh, so you're the one that people say looks like my son." I was kinda confused and weirded out, but she explained that numerous of her friends had told her about this guy around town that looks exactly like your son. I live in a relatively small city, less than 10,000 people. She didn't show me a picture or anything, but I still live in the city and still keep my eye out for my fabled doppelganger, so that one day we may fight to the death. That reminds me of the time I was at a memorial service of a friend Jay, and Jay's parents came up to me and were like, "Oh, you're the one who looks like Jay in the photos." Jay and I didn't look exactly alike, but at certain angles we had similar profiles, nose shape, hair etc, and someone had sent them photos of their deceased daughter, but also included several of photos of me by mistake, cause they got confused. Apparently even the parents looked at the photos and were like, "Wait, is that Jay? I don't recognize those clothes." I didn't know what to say. I was doing last minute Father's Day shopping with my son for my husband. There was a young lady in the card section crying forlorn, broken hearted ugly crying. I looked at her and thought, poor thing, I hope she's okay. We finished our shopping, line up to check out, and she was still there. She's pick up a card, look at it, burst into fresh tears, put it back, then compose herself, and lose it all over again. By now my heart was breaking for her, so I sent my son off to grab a box of chocolates. We bought our stuff and waited just outside for her. When she came out I grabbed the chocks, approached her and said, "I don't know what's going on, and it's none of my business, but I got these for you. I promise things will get better." She burst into tears, grabbed me in a hug, and said my dad died 2 days ago. Anyway, longish story short, we sat down and she told me about her dad and how she wanted to put a Father's Day card in his coffin with the present she'd gotten him and all the things people need to say when someone they love dies suddenly. We went our separate ways when she saw how late it was, and honestly, to this day I don't know if I'd recognize her, even if I bumped into her again. But I've always wondered how she made it through her first Father's Day without her dad, and how she's doing now. I haven't told anyone but my husband this story before, and I'm only sharing it now on the random chance she reads it and remembers us, and I can find out how she's doing. There should be more people like you. What you did probably meant a lot to that lady. Thank you. It wasn't something I could ignore. Not a complete stranger, but a classmate in my first year at uni. We shared some classes, but didn't really spoke to each other beside the casual greetings. One morning she got a call on her cell phone, came back to the classroom visibly upset to gather her things and left. I never saw her again after that. Still think randomly about it sometimes, 14 years later. That reminds me of a time in college when a classmate of mine just started crying out of nowhere during a lecture. It was very noticeable since she sat at the front of the class near the professor, so everyone looked on awkwardly since we didn't know what was going on. I didn't know or talk to her, but I later found out from other classmates that she wasn't doing too well in the class, and it was her third time retaking the course, so the stress built up, and she had a panic attack given that repeating a course more than 3 times got you out of a program. She eventually calmed down and left the classroom, but to this day I still wonder whether she passed the class or not, especially considering that the final exam was very difficult. I hope she's doing okay. It's still something I think about every now and then since it's the only time that's happened in a class. One day when I was a freshman in college, I sat next to this guy in O Chemical who looked between 30 and 50 years old. He listened intently to the lecture, took copious notes, and even recorded the lecture. After the first midterm, I sat next to him again when they were handing back our tests. He gets his and just stared at the pages. I tried not to peek at his score, but I could see a great deal of red ink. Suddenly, I notice a big fat tear fall on his chest and his shoulders kind of go up and down. After class he pulled me aside and asked me how I did so well on the test. We then went to a cafe and he told me his life story. Ever since he was young he wanted to be a mortician. He had completed all of the requirements except for organic chemistry. This was his third and last attempt. If he didn't pass he would still graduate, but not be able to be a mortician. I offered to help him, because I couldn't believe how he could be so confused when it came so easily to me. Every day for the rest of the semester we spent 1 or 2 hours studying chemical together, and 1 or 2 Sundays we spent all day together. He even offered to pay me for my time, but I told him it was unnecessary because I was getting a lot out of it, because explaining things to him solidified the concepts for me. He ended up passing the class. The second semester we didn't study together, but by then he had figured the subject out and could do it on his own. Stan, if you're out there, I hope you achieved your dream. I was on my way back from Disneyland Paris, sat in the airport and a guy beside me was typing away on his laptop. A little curious at what he was writing, I peeked over and saw the title, The Last Letter I'll Ever Write. I was frozen for a few minutes, M24, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. I thought maybe he was a writer, and if I ask he'll look stupid. Eventually though I turned round to him and said, "Look man, I really hope I'm making a fool of myself, but are you okay?" Turns out he and his long-term partner had broken up, and they were meant to be coming on this holiday that he'd now come on with his dad. He blamed himself, and he'd been going to therapy for a while to get out of a pretty dark place, but some days were better than others, and writing the letters was an exercise from his therapist. We chatted for a bit about her, his dad, me, life in general. Turned out his brother lived nearby me and frequented a coffee shop right by where I used to live. Eventually my plane got called and we hugged, and I told him I really hope things get better for him and that at the very least I'd had a lovely time talking to him. We left there, and I still wonder what happened to him. I hope he's happy now. I hope that he's managed to find some good in the world again. But I guess I'll never know for sure. Daydream a good life for him. When I was a kid we didn't have a lot of money, so we often shopped at thrift stores. What I loved about that was that you could get 10 books for $1, so I would plant myself in front of the book section and make piles of which one I wanted to get, and then decided after I'd gone through them all. One day an older lady saw me sitting with my piles and asked if I liked to read. I told her I did and showed her a few of the books I found that I liked. She smiled and then pulled $1 out of her purse, handed it to me and said, "Promise me that you'll keep reading." I was so happy and immediately stood up and said that I would. She smiled and walked away, and I went back to my piles able to pick out an extra 10 books to take home. It was just a small act of kindness for her, but for me having a random stranger encourage my love of reading and making me promise to never stop definitely had a lot to do with my continued love of reading. This was over 20 years ago, but I still think of her whenever I buy a new book. I've read this story before. This exact one. Have you ever posted this anywhere before? Yup, I've posted here before, and a bunch of places have also used it. 1986. A year after graduating from a tiny college on Idaho, I was at Disneyland with a high school buddy. I was totally convinced that I saw a college friend, Adam, in line at Pirates of the Caribbean. I kept waving at him, but he looked at me like I was out of my mind. My high school friend tried to talk me down, saying that Adam clearly had no idea who I was. It's not him. Everyone has a twin. Yada, yada, yada. The line finally snakes around to where I'm standing right next to Adam, so I tap him on the shoulder and ask, "Hey, aren't you Adam M?" And he says no, I'm his twin brother Aaron. 34 years later, and I still tell that story at parties. I only met Aaron once, in 1986, in line at Pirates, but I do wish him and Adam a very happy birthday on Facebook. Their parents didn't make it very far through the baby names book. I know some twins named Adam and Alex. Their parents didn't get much further. Until my most recent car, I've always driven old junkers that somehow managed to get me to and from work, and bless them for it. But for this memory, my metallic orange 1996 Chevy Corsica was bottoming out the brakes when I was stopped too long at lights and would shut down entirely. I drifted off to the side, called my parents and job to let them know what was going on. and just had to wait for help to show. There was no shoulder for me to pull into, and cars were whizzing past fast enough to shake my car, which I was sweating to death inside of because of course none of my cars had AC. I watch the cars go by, see about 2 cop cars come and go without so much as a pause, which is weird given where I was stuck, and with my hazards going too, but whatever. It's Jersey, I'm not expecting much, besides a ticket. An undercover car pulls up behind me, and a sweet middle-aged guy asks what's up. I'll let him know I'm just waiting on help to push the car to the other side of the road at least, since there's a shoulder there. He has me hop out and make sure that there really isn't any way to move it without some extra muscle, and lets me come hang in his car so I can at least catch some air. I leave the door cracked just to be safe, but he's nice about it all. He has the lights inside going, and the radio is crackling things I barely understand, but seemed legit enough. Turns out he's not police, but disaster relief, and tells me all about how he helped out when Sandy hit, and also how he noticed the cops drive on past without even checking in, and how he'll be reporting them for it. Super chill dude. I had to ask why, if he's just disaster relief, did he stop by, and he just mentioned that he would hope someone would do the same for his daughter. Eventually my help shows up, and it's all settled, and I thanked him about 100+ times, but I still think about him, and it warms my heart to remember that people do things just to be nice sometimes too. Similar story here. I was driving my granddad old truck that had an oil problem. It finally gave in a turning lane of an intersection. I'm upset because it's my granddad's truck and I treasured that old clunker like it was my child. I couldn't get it all the way over to the shoulder and ended up finding a high-vis vest to hang off the tailgate while I called my granddad. A gentleman with a flatbed saw my awkward position, parked his truck in a way that forced traffic around us, and helped push my truck while I steered. He was a cool dude, and I know I did not thank him enough. When I was a kid I went with my family on vacation to Veracruz in Mexico. We decided to eat some empanadas in the street, and while we were eating 2 Chinese tourists arrived and asked us with signs. They were speaking Chinese all the time. If they could take a photo, my parents said yes, and each one of them took a photo with our family. While we were eating empanadas they said goodbye in Chinese and continue their journey. Similar stories. My younger sister, who had bright blonde hair when she was little, has been specifically asked or gestured because of language barrier for a photo with Chinese tourists on about 4 or 5 separate occasions while we were on family holidays around the country. We still laugh today that these people have holiday photos with a random, blonde, Australian toddler. Dude, when I moved to the US I was genuinely amazed with how many people have blonde hair. In the 13 years of my life that I lived in Pakistan I saw a total of 1 blonde person in real life. I thought it was really cool.